The morning sun painted the floating islands in gold, and the air smelled of wind and wildflowers. Children ran along the wooden bridges that connected the small towers, laughing as the dragons soared above them. These dragons were not like any other creatures. They were young, playful, and full of curiosity. Their scales shined like jewels, and their small wings fluttered as they tried to rise higher into the sky. Tobin and Leora watched from the edge of a cliff, their hearts full of excitement. The dragon children, no bigger than a human child, were practicing their first long flights with careful guidance from the elders. Tobin had always been fascinated by dragons. He admired their courage, their freedom, and the way they seemed to understand humans without words. Leora was more cautious, but she loved the dragons too, especially a little blue one named Zephyr, who liked to nuzzle her hand. Everything seemed perfect until a sudden shadow passed over the cliff. Tobin squinted into the distance and noticed that the group of dragon children was smaller than before. One, then another, had vanished. Panic flickered in his chest. He pointed toward the sky. "Where are they?" he shouted. The other children stopped and gasped. The elders called out from below, their voices trembling with worry. "The dragons, they are gone," one of them shouted. Leora grabbed Tobin's arm. "We have to tell someone," she said. But Tobin shook his head. "We can't wait. We have to find them now." His eyes were bright with determination. He didn't know exactly how, but he felt deep inside that the dragons were not in danger. They were just somewhere they shouldn't be, and only someone brave enough could reach them. The children ran down the winding paths toward the forest at the base of the cliff. The wind whispered around them, carrying hints of scales and the faint, sweet smell of dragon fire. They followed small claw marks on the rocks, leading toward the clouds above. Tobin's heart raced. He had never gone beyond the safe flying zones before, but the thought of the dragons alone made his fear melt into courage. As they climbed higher, the air became thinner and colder. Leora shivered but kept moving. "Do you think they're scared?" she asked softly. Tobin shook his head. "No," he said. "I think they're curious. Like us. But we have to find them before something bad happens." The trail led them to a narrow ledge that disappeared into a thick fog. The children paused, peering into the mist. They could hear faint giggles, soft and musical, carried by the wind. Tobin smiled. "They're laughing," he whispered. "They're okay. They're just somewhere they shouldn't be." "Somewhere we shouldn't go either," Leora said nervously. But Tobin's eyes shone with determination. "Then we go anyway." Step by step, they followed the sounds of laughter into the clouds. Small pieces of glowing scales marked the way, shining like tiny stars in the fog. Every now and then, a gust of wind almost knocked them off balance, but Tobin held Leora's hand and guided her safely. They were careful, but they did not stop. After what felt like hours, they reached the edge of a hidden cliff that hung in the sky, like a secret garden in the clouds. There, in a small clearing, they saw the dragon children. The little dragons played among the floating rocks, chasing each other and tumbling through the air, wings flapping clumsily. Zephyr spotted Leora and squealed with joy, gliding toward her before falling softly onto a rock. Leora laughed and picked him up. Tobin looked around in awe. The place was beautiful, almost magical, with soft sunlight reflecting off sparkling pools and mist curling around the edges. But even in this beauty, he felt a shiver of worry. The dragons could not stay here alone for long. The winds were too strong, and the cliff edges were sharp. One wrong step, and a dragon could fall. Suddenly, a stronger gust of wind blew across the clearing. Zephyr flapped his wings desperately, trying to stay balanced. Another dragon squealed, and Tobin realized they needed help to fly safely. "We have to teach them," he said, his voice low but steady. Leora nodded. "Yes. We can't leave them here alone." But as they moved closer, a shadow fell over the clearing. Tobin froze. He could not see clearly through the thick clouds, but he sensed movement, something large, maybe dangerous, hiding beyond the mist. The dragon children stopped playing, huddling together with nervous squeaks. Tobin gritted his teeth. "Whatever it is, we'll protect them," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The children exchanged determined looks. They did not know what dangers awaited them in the clouds, but one thing was certain: they would not let the dragons fall or get lost. And in that moment, Tobin and Leora felt a courage stronger than fear, the kind only humans could find when everything they loved was at stake. Above them, the dragon children chirped and giggled, unaware of the risks, but trusting in the humans who had already risked so much to find them. And Tobin knew, deep in his heart, that the real adventure was only beginning. The clouds swirled around Tobin and Leora as they climbed higher into the sky, following the faint trail of glowing scales. The wind whipped at their hair and clothes, making their hearts pound faster. Below them, the floating city looked like a tiny model, distant and fragile. Tobin's small glider creaked under the pressure, but he held the ropes tight, determined not to fall. Leora followed close behind, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "Do you think the dragons know we're coming?" Leora asked, her voice almost lost in the wind. "I think they do," Tobin said. "They always know." He glanced over his shoulder at Zephyr, who had perched on the edge of Leora's shoulder, wings trembling but eyes shining. "They trust us." The clouds grew thicker, turning the world around them into a gray, swirling sea. Every step was harder than the last, and the trail of scales seemed to vanish in the mist. Tobin squinted, trying to spot any sign of movement. Then, a faint laugh reached their ears, a high, musical sound that made Leora smile despite the fear. "There," she said, pointing ahead. "The dragons." They moved carefully along the narrow ledges of floating rocks, gripping every handhold they could find. A sudden gust nearly sent Tobin tumbling, and he caught himself just in time. Leora's heart raced as she watched him. "Be careful," she shouted. Tobin nodded, his jaw tight with concentration. "I will," he called back. "We're almost there." The first obstacle appeared, a wall of swirling wind, twisting and howling around a floating rock cluster. Tobin studied it for a moment, then turned to Leora. "We have to cross it together. Hold on to each other." She nodded, and they gripped hands, inching forward as the wind buffeted them. Zephyr flapped his wings, chirping nervously, but stayed close to Leora's shoulder. Step by step, they moved through the storm. The wind threatened to throw them off balance, but Tobin's steady grip and quick thinking kept them safe. He grabbed a small piece of rope and tied it between two rocks, creating a makeshift safety line. Leora followed carefully, testing each step before trusting it. Their faces were red from the cold, and their muscles burned from the effort, but they pressed on. Finally, they reached a calmer section, a small plateau of stone floating in the clouds. The dragons were ahead, their small wings beating rapidly as they jumped from rock to rock. Tobin and Leora stopped for a moment to catch their breath, watching the dragons play. Zephyr looked at Leora and squealed happily, nuzzling her hand. Leora laughed, the sound bright and clear in the gray air. "Look at them," Tobin said, smiling despite the fear. "They're strong, but they can't fly far yet. We have to help them." As they moved forward, the next challenge appeared. A cluster of sharp, jagged rocks jutted from the clouds, forming a natural barrier. To cross it, they would have to jump from rock to rock while keeping the dragons safe. Tobin examined the path carefully. "We'll go first," he said. "Then we'll guide the dragons." Leora nodded, trusting his plan. The jumps were difficult. Tobin's legs ached, and the wind tried to push them off balance, but he focused on each step. Leora followed, keeping Zephyr close. Behind them, the other dragons watched nervously, wings fluttering as if ready to leap but unsure how. Tobin and Leora reached the other side first, panting and exhausted. Leora looked back. "Come on, little ones. You can do it," she called. One by one, the dragons started moving, guided by the children's voices and gentle nudges. They stumbled at first, wings flapping clumsily, but Tobin encouraged them. "You're stronger than you think," he shouted. "Just believe in yourself." Halfway across, a sudden gust blew hard, tossing one of the smaller dragons, a green one named Ember, off balance. Leora lunged, catching Ember in her arms just before he fell. The dragon squealed, but his eyes were wide with trust. Tobin reached out to steady Zephyr, who was struggling against the wind. Together, they kept the dragons moving, teaching them courage and focus with each step. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the top of a high-floating plateau. The wind calmed, and the clouds parted slightly, revealing a hidden grove above them. The dragons chirped and squealed, jumping and flapping their wings with joy. Tobin and Leora exchanged tired smiles. They had made it this far, but they knew the hardest part was still ahead, teaching the dragons to fly properly so they could return safely. Leora looked at Tobin, her eyes shining. "We did it," she said softly. "We found them." Tobin nodded, but his face was serious. "Yes," he said, "but now comes the real test. We have to help them fly, and it's not going to be easy." The dragons chirped and tumbled around them, unaware of the danger still ahead, trusting the humans completely. Tobin reached out, touching Zephyr's small head. "Don't worry, little one," he whispered. "We'll get you flying. I promise." Above them, the clouds began to shift, glowing faintly with sunlight. Tobin and Leora stood together, surrounded by dragons and the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges the sky had in store. Their adventure had only just begun, and every step forward would test their courage, their wit, and their bond with the dragons. The hidden grove was like nothing Tobin and Leora had ever seen. Soft sunlight filtered through floating crystal trees, casting rainbow reflections on the mist. Small pools of clear water glimmered on the rocks, and delicate flowers clung to the edges of the cliffs. The dragon children tumbled and played among the stones, their laughter echoing through the quiet sky. Tobin took a deep breath, feeling both awe and worry. The place was beautiful, but it was fragile. One wrong move, and a dragon could fall. "This place, it's amazing," Leora whispered, her eyes wide. She held Zephyr close, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her chest. "But it's not safe for them alone." Tobin nodded. "We have to help them learn to fly before it's too late. Look at their wings, they're small, weak. If a strong wind blows, they could be in real danger." He looked at the other dragons, watching them struggle to keep balance on the uneven rocks. Ember flapped nervously, nearly toppling into a small pool. Tobin reached out, steadying him with a careful hand. The children moved slowly through the grove, trying to keep the dragons calm. Tobin's eyes scanned the area. "We need to find a safe spot where they can practice," he said. "Somewhere with open space and gentle winds." Leora pointed to a flat plateau near the center of the grove. "There," she said. "That spot. We can stand at the edge and guide them." They led the dragons carefully to the plateau. Tobin and Leora's hearts pounded as the little dragons looked down from the edge, their tiny wings trembling. "Don't worry," Tobin said, kneeling beside Zephyr. "We're here. You can do this." The first dragon, a red one named Flint, took a hesitant step forward. He flapped his wings clumsily, and the wind caught him. Leora gasped, but Tobin reached out just in time to steady him. "Good job, Flint. Keep going," he encouraged. The dragon squealed and tried again, this time managing a short glide before landing safely. Ember was next. He stared nervously over the edge, shaking. Leora held his small claws. "You can do it," she whispered. "I'll be right here." She gave him a gentle push, and Ember flapped his wings with all his might. He lifted a few feet into the air before wobbling and landing in Leora's arms. "See? You can fly," she said, smiling. The other dragons followed one by one, each attempt a mix of laughter and nervous squeals. Tobin guided Zephyr carefully, showing him how to flap and balance. "Not too fast, not too slow," he said. "Feel the wind, trust your wings." Zephyr chirped, nodding his tiny head, and managed a small glide, landing perfectly beside Tobin. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful. The dragons laughed, flapped, and tumbled through the air. Tobin and Leora felt a warm pride swell in their hearts. But then, a sudden strong gust blew across the plateau, rattling the crystal trees and sending small rocks tumbling. The dragons froze, wings spread wide, unsure how to keep balance. Tobin grabbed Zephyr and pulled him close. "Hold on," he shouted. Leora clutched Ember tightly, leaning into the wind. One of the larger dragons, a green one named Jade, struggled to stay upright and was swept toward the edge. Tobin and Leora moved quickly, shouting encouragement and guiding the dragon's wings to balance against the gust. It was exhausting, but their efforts paid off. One by one, the dragons managed to stabilize, gliding safely in short bursts. Tobin's arms ached from holding and steadying the dragons, but he refused to stop. "We've come this far," he told Leora. "We can't give up now. They need us." Leora nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "We'll do it. Together." They spent hours teaching the dragons to read the wind, to flap in rhythm, and to trust their instincts. Each success was met with squeals of joy, each fall with gentle reassurance. Slowly, the dragons began to soar higher and farther, their confidence growing with every attempt. By late afternoon, the hidden grove was alive with movement. Dragons glided from crystal tree to crystal tree, chirping and laughing, wings strong and graceful. Tobin and Leora stood at the edge of the plateau, tired but smiling. They had helped the dragons take their first real flights, and the sense of accomplishment warmed them through and through. But Tobin's eyes scanned the horizon nervously. The clouds above the grove were thickening, dark and heavy. "We can't stay here too long," he said. "A storm is coming, and the dragons aren't ready for it yet." Leora looked up and shivered. "Then we need to find a way to get them out safely. Soon." Tobin reached for Zephyr, holding him close. "We've done well," he said softly. "But the real test is coming. The dragons need to fly not just here, but back home. And we'll have to help them every step of the way." The dragons chirped around them, unaware of the storm, trusting the humans completely. Tobin and Leora exchanged determined looks. They had taught the dragons courage, patience, and trust, but now, they would need every bit of courage themselves. Above them, the clouds swirled ominously, and the wind picked up again. Tobin clenched his fists. "Whatever happens, we'll keep them safe," he said, voice steady. Leora nodded, gripping Zephyr's tiny claws. "Together," she said. And in that hidden haven among the clouds, humans and dragons prepared for the next step, a test of skill, courage, and heart, unlike anything they had faced before. The wind had grown stronger by morning, and the hidden grove, which had seemed so peaceful yesterday, now felt wild and dangerous. Clouds rolled in thick and gray, and gusts swept across the floating plateau like invisible hands. Tobin and Leora stood at the edge, looking down at the dragon children, their wings twitching nervously. Today was the real test. They had to teach the dragons to fly properly, or the storm could sweep them away. "Are you ready?" Tobin asked, tightening his grip on Zephyr. The little dragon chirped and flapped his tiny wings in reply. Leora held Ember close, whispering encouragements into his ear. "You can do this. Trust your wings." One by one, Tobin and Leora guided the dragons to the edge of the plateau. Flint, the red dragon, was first. Tobin knelt beside him. "Take a deep breath, feel the wind, and flap. I'll be right here if you fall." Flint hesitated, looking at the gap between the rocks and the swirling clouds below. Then, with a squeal of determination, he leapt forward. His small wings flapped furiously, and for a moment, it seemed like he would tumble, but Tobin adjusted his angle, giving a gentle push, and Flint glided safely to the other side. Tobin grinned. "Good job. That's how it's done." Ember was next. Leora let him step forward, his tiny claws trembling. The wind caught him immediately, tossing him toward the edge. Leora lunged, steadying him, and whispered, "You're stronger than you think. Believe it." Ember flapped with all his might, wobbling, spinning, and then, miraculously, he lifted higher, soaring a short distance before landing in Leora's arms. See? You can do it, she said, her voice filled with pride. Zephyr and the other dragons followed, each flight a mix of trial and triumph. Some stumbled at first, hitting rocks or spinning out of control, but Tobin and Leora guided them, steadying their wings, encouraging them with shouts and hand signals. The children had never worked so hard, but they refused to give up. Every dragon that succeeded was a victory, every fall a lesson. Suddenly, a violent gust swept across the plateau, stronger than any before. Jade, the green dragon, was caught mid-jump, flailing in the wind. Tobin dove, catching her just in time. The force of the gust nearly knocked him off balance, and Leora grabbed Zephyr, holding him tight against her chest. We can't let go. Tobin shouted, his teeth clenched against the wind. Hold on. Keep flapping. The dragons struggled, wings beating wildly, but they began to sense the rhythm of the wind. Tobin guided them with gentle nudges and precise instructions. Flap with me. Now. Harder. Slowly, one by one, the dragons caught the pattern of the gusts, lifting themselves and soaring in short, controlled bursts. Tobin and Leora cheered, their voices barely audible over the roaring wind. Hours passed. Their arms ached, their legs trembled, and their faces were streaked with sweat and wind. But the dragons improved with every attempt. Ember could glide across the plateau without help. Flint looped and swooped with grace. Zephyr soared alongside Tobin, almost matching his speed and precision. Even Jade, once the most nervous, began to rise and bank confidently through the gusts. Finally, Tobin and Leora paused, leaning against a rock to catch their breath. Around them, the dragons hovered, circling the plateau like tiny, jewel-colored birds. The children smiled, hearts pounding with pride. We did it, Leora said, her voice almost lost in the wind. They can really fly now. Tobin nodded, but his eyes scanned the clouds above nervously. Yes, but this was just practice. The storm is coming, and we need to get them safely back home. He looked at Zephyr, who chirped and flapped, ready to rise again. We're going to have to fly together, all of us. The dragons seemed to understand. They circled closer to the humans, trusting them completely. Tobin grabbed a rope and fashioned a harness for himself and Zephyr, while Leora did the same for Ember. The other dragons followed, linking claws with one another in a chain of trust. Tobin took a deep breath. Ready? He shouted. Let's go. They launched into the sky. The wind buffeted them, but Tobin and Leora guided the dragons, their voices and hands moving in perfect coordination. Each dragon flapped hard, using the lessons they had learned. The children shouted encouragement, adjusting angles, pushing and pulling when the gusts threatened to sweep them away. The storm loomed closer, dark clouds swirling around them, but the dragons, now stronger and braver, rose above the danger. Tobin felt a rush of triumph as Zephyr flapped alongside him, steady and confident. Leora and Ember soared through the gusts, squealing with joy. The dragons were flying, really flying, thanks to the courage, patience, and guidance of the human children. As the first raindrops fell, Tobin and Leora led the dragons toward a safer, lower plateau. Every step of the journey had been dangerous, exhausting, and terrifying, but also exhilarating. The dragons had learned to fly, and the humans had proved that courage, ingenuity, and heart could overcome even the fiercest challenges. When they finally landed, drenched but smiling, the dragons chirped and nudged the children, tiny wings beating in gratitude. Tobin looked at Leora, breathless but proud. We did more than teach them to fly, he said softly. We showed them hope. The storm rumbled above them, but for a moment, in that hidden grove, humans and dragons shared a victory that nothing could take away. The storm had passed, leaving the hidden grove wet and glistening in the soft afternoon sunlight. Tobin and Leora stood at the edge of the plateau, looking down at the floating islands that led back to their city. Below, the human world waited, unaware of the adventure that had taken place high among the clouds. The dragon children chirped and flapped their wings nervously, testing the air currents one last time. Today, they would fly home, not just for practice, but for real. Tobin crouched beside Zephyr. "This is it," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're going to go all the way. Together. We have to trust each other." Zephyr chirped and nudged his hand, wings twitching. Leora held Ember, who squealed softly, sensing the tension. "We can do this," she whispered. "We've done everything else. Now it's time to fly." The dragons gathered around, small wings flapping in anticipation. Tobin looked at each of them, remembering the journey, the cliff, the clouds, the gusts, and the hidden grove. Each dragon had faced fear and learned courage. Now, they would face the open skies, the real challenge. Tobin adjusted his harness, securing Zephyr. Leora did the same for Ember. The other dragons lined up, ready to follow. "On my mark," Tobin shouted, his voice carrying through the mist. "Flap together. Trust the wind. Trust us." They leapt. The dragons flapped frantically at first, wobbling and spinning as the wind tried to push them off course. Tobin and Leora shouted instructions, guiding them with hands and gentle nudges. "Higher. Balance. Keep going." Slowly, the dragons found their rhythm, wings steady and strong. Zephyr soared alongside Tobin, Ember alongside Leora. The other dragons followed, flapping hard, chirping, and laughing with exhilaration. The clouds began to thin, revealing the sprawling floating islands below. Tobin's heart pounded as he glanced down. The gap between the hidden grove and the first safe plateau was wide, and one wrong move could send a dragon tumbling. But the dragons trusted the humans completely. Tobin reached out, steadying Zephyr's small wings mid-flap. "You've got this," he shouted. "I believe in you." Zephyr chirped and angled himself perfectly, gliding to the next rock. Ember followed, squealing with joy as Leora guided him. "See? You're amazing," she said. Ember flapped harder, swooping higher than he ever had before. The other dragons, inspired by their friends, pushed themselves too, wings beating fast, scales shimmering in the sunlight. Tobin and Leora felt their hearts swell. They had risked everything, and it was paying off. But then, a sudden gust whipped through the sky, stronger than anything before. Jade, the green dragon, was tossed sideways, flapping frantically. Tobin lunged, catching her mid-air, guiding her back into formation. "Hold on," he shouted. Leora steadied Ember, shouting instructions at the others. The dragons trusted them completely, and with careful movements, they all adjusted their wings, gliding safely past the gust. As they cleared the dangerous zone, the plateau below came into view, a wide, open space, safe for landing. Tobin and Leora guided the dragons down, cheering as each one glided gracefully to the ground. Zephyr landed beside Tobin, chirping and rubbing his head against Tobin's shoulder. Ember flopped happily beside Leora. The other dragons landed one by one, wings tired but steady. Tobin sank to the ground, exhausted but elated. Leora laughed, brushing her wet hair from her face. "We did it," she said softly. "We really did it." Tobin nodded, looking at the dragons. "Not just us," he said. "They did it too. They trusted themselves. They trusted us. That's what made it possible." The dragons chirped and tumbled around them, flapping wings in excitement. Tobin reached out and stroked Zephyr's head. "You're ready now," he whispered. "Ready to go home." The little dragon chirped again, glancing toward the floating city below. Tobin smiled. "Let's go." One by one, the dragons took off, soaring higher and faster, confident in their wings. Tobin and Leora followed, guiding them through the last stretch of open sky. The wind buffeted them, but now it felt like a friend rather than an enemy. The dragons rose above it, wings strong, laughter echoing across the clouds. When they finally reached the city, the elders and townspeople stared in awe. The dragon children glided down, landing safely in the open squares. Cheers erupted as the dragons chirped and nuzzled their human friends. Tobin and Leora landed beside Zephyr and Ember, smiling tired but proud. The city had witnessed a moment of wonder, humans and dragons soaring together, united in courage and trust. Tobin looked at Leora, her eyes shining. "We didn't just teach them to fly," he said softly. "We showed them hope. And courage. And that humans can do extraordinary things." Leora nodded. "And they'll never forget it. Neither will we." Above them, the dragon children flapped their wings in unison, circling the city. Their laughter was a song of triumph, echoing across the islands. The humans below watched in awe, hearts lifted, spirits inspired. For a moment, nothing else mattered, just dragons, children, and the boundless sky. Tobin and Leora held hands, looking up at the flying dragons. They had risked everything, faced fear, and guided their friends through impossible challenges. And now, as dragons and humans soared together, it was clear to everyone: courage, trust, and the human spirit could lift even the smallest wings to the greatest heights. And somewhere in the wind, Tobin whispered to Zephyr, "We'll always be here for you. Always." Zephyr chirped, circling around him, wings strong and steady. The city below clapped and cheered, but Tobin only smiled, looking up at the sky. The adventure was over, but the bond they had formed would last forever.